We are so pleased to have you join us on Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome once again. I am Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So, the original air date for this is going to be the day after Election Day. So, you maybe are getting up and checking your news and seeing who won in your area. Maybe you're happy, maybe you're sad, maybe you have just given up on the whole system. But we wanted to talk a little bit about, are we repeating ourselves? Are we repeating this process over and over and over again, expecting a different outcome, which, as the saying goes, that's just crazy.
Yeah. Then the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And each election cycle, we all hear the ads. We all, get mad when one person's saying something, and happy when another person's saying something. And we seem to be in our corners these days, and our person is right and your person is wrong, and we that sometimes even the issues aren't even important to us as much as the person and who they represent, or which party they represent, or all those things. But we keep going through these election cycles. We keep all saying we hate it. We say we don't like the ads, and yet we're all subject to them and listening to them. Why do we do it?
Oh, there's, I'm sure, a whole philosophy around why we do it. I want to read just the opening paragraph to an article that got posted on a CNN politics page just today. It says, the 5 most expensive Senate races of 2022 have seen nearly $1.3 billion in spending across the primary and general elections. According to Open Secrets, a website, a staggering sum that speaks to the massive amounts of money flooding the political system. So 1.3 billion in 5 Senate races. I have no idea what the total amount of spending on political ads this cycle has been, but I would imagine it's somewhere over $2 billion. If that was just 5 Senate races, I would think that would be in line with the math. And I start thinking $2 billion. All of the things that these people are campaigning on could be solved with $2 billion. It makes me a little bit bananas. But to your point, are we going to do something different next go round? And why do we continue to feed this monster? Is there some psychology behind it? Is it just we haven't figured out a better way of doing things? I don't even know if I can formulate the curious question around politics in the moment.
Well, I think the obvious answer is, or the obvious question, I should say, is there a better way to do this? Is there a more effective way to do this? Is there a way we can spend less money and trust the outcome more? I think this is part of the frustration that I think folks have is, if we don't spend the money, we can't win. And so is there a certain amount of money that you have to spend just to stay in the game, and then a different amount of money there is to get close, and a different amount of money to win? And then does that money come with strings attached once the person is elected?
Right.
And should we go to something where we limit the amount of money that campaigns can spend to X dollars, and what does that do to freedom of speech? But let me start with a statement, one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill. And I may have said this on the podcast before, but it's just as germane for sure for this subject, and that is, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. And so we'll start there. We live in a democracy, we have free speech, and we spend a lot of money on political ads.
Yeah.
The issue, I think, is the trend towards how much money we spend on ads, because I know that people, when they hear what you just said, I'm sitting there thinking, how many of the problems that these politicians are saying they're going to solve could have been solved with a quarter of the amount of money we just spent getting them elected? And I think a lot of us have that question. Now, money doesn't solve all problems, and sometimes throwing good money after bad and in bad systems is not the right answer. But having said that, is there a way to tamp down on the money? The other thing I heard yesterday, a commentator say is, well, here we are at this point of the season, election day is tomorrow. And so the ads will suddenly stop. And he says, and at what point do they stop? Because is there anybody out there going, boy, if I just see one more ad,
I'm going
to change my vote.
Exactly.
And so we have to think about what is the efficacy of the dollars being spent.
Yep.
And at what point, and now with early voting, okay, I voted several weeks ago. So now ads are not going to change my mind. It's already there. So anyway, is there a way to spend less money on the process, more money on the solutions, and still get the desired outcome?
I would imagine if you can figure out the answer to those, you will be elected to office.
Well, I doubt it, because it would take a campaign with a lot of money that
catch-22.
I'd have to go raise. Well, and that's the other part, is raising money.
Yeah.
I think we all have at least a peripheral idea of how that money is raised. And, some of it's door to door and, really listening to people and going to fundraisers and things like that. A lot of it is just big money that just pours into campaigns with no listening mode or anything, and probably some strings attached. And do we want that to be part of the system? And I think a lot of us think no, but I don't have an alternative.
Right.
What are the alternatives? Could we all agree on an alternative? My goodness, we can't even agree on which candidates to vote for, which parties to vote for, and what platforms that they're standing on. So how could we agree on? I think we all worry that if we change the election laws, the funding mechanisms, if we change the way that we run campaigns, then it might be more favorable to the candidate that I don't want than my candidate.
It's such an ugly mess, and I'm a little afraid that at the end of our 25 minutes, we're not going to have a rosy concluding statement in this. But I think it is important that sometimes we do ask the hard questions, even if there's no immediate resolution or no answer, even in sight anywhere. Because I think we do need to start contemplating as a collective group of people, why do we do what we do? Why do we continue on a pattern that doesn't benefit anyone aside from potentially the advertising outlets that are receiving the money to run the ads, whether it be print or media, fill in the blank. I would imagine this is the most money that these outlets have earned since before COVID.
Many, and the U.S. Postal Service is making money on bulk mailings, and there's a lot of people who would be hurt, or at least they would perceive to be hurt, if we changed some of the ways we did that. So financially and other ways, and so we have to think about that too. But I don't know, the story comes to mind about the lady who's preparing the ham for Christmas, and she takes the ham out, puts it on the counter, and cuts the ends off, and then puts it in the pan and puts it in the oven. And the son is watching this process, and he says, "Why'd you cut the ends off the ham?" "Well, because that's what you do." "Well, do you know why?" "Well, no." "Okay, well, let me call my dad." "Okay, hey Dad, why did we always cut the ends off the ham?" "Oh, I don't know. Let's call Grandma." We call Grandma. "Why did we cut the ends off the ham?" She says, "Oh, because I had this oven that was this big, and only this pan would fit in, so I had to cut the ends off the ham to put it in the pan." So, in other words, sometimes we continue to do things just because that's the way it's been done, and we don't know any other way.
Yeah.
So I think it's always important, even if we can't get to the answer at the end of this 25 minutes, as you say, that we are able to ask the questions.
Yeah.
And isn't the basic premise of what we call free speech these days, which I think is under attack by all sides. But because I think if we don't hear what we want to hear, we say that that's not free speech. It's misinformation. But what about that? I mean, what is it? What is truth? What is the right way to do something? What are these things? I mean, if you grew up always cutting the ends off the ham, well, then that's what you do. And if someone questions it, you might think, well, why are you even questioning that? That's one of my values. That's how I was raised.
That's right.
What is your problem? Where I think it's always okay. It should always be okay to say, why do we do this? If you don't have an answer, well, then, my goodness, I think that that's something that should be explored.
Oh, this is a fascinating topic to me and opens up a whole lot of other subtopics in my brain as I think through this. I can easily imagine some of these conversations playing out, and our tendency as people is to take things personally, to have a rebuttal that's maybe a little bit saucy because you feel like you're not being heard or understood. And so whether the question is, why do you cut the ends off the ham, or why do you vote that way, or why do you support that candidate, instead of receiving it as a genuine item of curiosity and assuming the intent behind the question is really seeking knowledge, we already have a preconceived notion that it's a judgment statement, and so we fire back in a way that the person doesn't receive the information that we provide because it's already loaded with an attitude. And so, this really plays into the whole curiosity, not judgment theme of everything that we're trying to do around this, is how do we ask good questions and how do we genuinely listen to the answers? And so I would love the opportunity to stand before, I don't know if the politician is the right person. I don't know who, an election committee, I don't know who I would approach, but say, why do we do it this way? And is there something better that we could do? When we're spending billions, with a B, billions of dollars on political advertisements, when most likely the populace has already made up their mind before they see the first ad, is there a better way?
Yeah, and I think the answer by definition is there is. I think the real question is there a better way that we could, A, come up with, B, sell to a majority of the people, and C, get implemented. Did I do two C's there? Anyway, A, B, C. I think that the issue is not, is there a better way? I think we could all agree that there probably is. The real issue is there a better way that we could all agree on and implement? And isn't that maybe part of the problem?
Yeah.
And at what point do you take a leadership position of, hey, enough is enough? Now, I would say that throughout the years, I think there was a time when people thought that there was probably an appropriate amount of money being spent on campaigns.
Maybe so.
Maybe not. Who knows? Maybe, these are not just inflated dollars. We are seeing a trend toward more and more money being spent on advertising, even using inflation as dollars. And I always try to think, okay, as an engineer, I'm seeing some points on the line, I'm seeing a trend, where does it end? So if we started saying we were going to spend half the nation's GDP on electing people, I'd rather do a random pick of people and send them to Washington than spend half the GDP. And I personally would expect a better result. But there's probably some charged statements in there. But the point is, at what point does it become excessive? Would we agree as a population that if it ever reached this point, we would do something?
Yeah.
I'm also a big believer in triggers. Okay, we don't have to do something until it gets to be a certain point, but can we all agree that if it gets to this point, we say that's enough? We've got to do something different.
Well, can we all agree? The answer is no. There will never be a time when we all agree. Can you get a majority to agree? Maybe. On a wing and a prayer, right? It just struck me very interesting that today also happened to be finally the Powerball number was hit after, weeks and weeks and weeks of nobody hitting the Powerball number. and I think it topped $2
Oh, it
billion.
got hit?
It got hit this afternoon,
Okay.
or earlier today, somebody in Southern California. So people spent just about as much on Powerball tickets as they did on election advertising. Can we somehow combine the two, run it through a computer, and spit out a candidate?
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly. No, and maybe AI should be the way to pick candidates in the future. I don't know. The way we select candidates in this country is something, is a whole nother subject.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have a two-party rule, and there's pros and cons to any system. And our system now, well, the two-party is not part of our system. It just happens that we have figured that out. It's been Republican and Democrat for the last, you know, X number of years. You know, before that we had the Whig Party, and we've had some other parties that have been prominent, but we've had attempts at third parties, Green Party, Libertarian,
Sure.
et cetera, that have not made it. And independents are, more and more people claim to be independent. Whether or not they actually are, or who they align with, is another story.
Mm-hmm.
But are we in a situation where we can figure out a different way to select candidates and run them through primaries and get them elected without all of the money being spent on the advertising? I don't know.
Yeah. You know, we may have mentioned this before, or I may have mentioned this before. You know, at one point in my, I'm going to say 10, 15 years ago, I seriously considered getting into politics. But there's two things that kept me out. One is this insatiable need to fundraise, which I despise fundraising. And two, just this idea that it's such a popularity contest, and throwing yourself in front of a pretty harsh audience to say all kinds of things, you know, slanderous and otherwise. And you just kind of have to take it, because there is no fighting back. There's no opportunity to clear your name, defend yourself, unless you get to a point of a debate, and then maybe someone will hear what you have to say. But it's just become so ugly, and we need good people to run for office. We absolutely need good people to run for office. But it precludes a whole lot of people from even considering public service because of what this system has become.
And that, now you're getting into a whole nother topic, and that is, you know, how do we get good people to run for office and take office? You know, I'm reminded that the root of politics, it comes from the Greek and the Latin polite, which literally means for the people. Mm-hmm. And yet we have made the word into something that is universally not favorable. In other words, I don't like the politics of that situation. Right. Or
don't talk about politics.
You know, Saturday Night Live had a skit the other night where, and I've just heard about this, but Stormy Daniels was on there, right? She's an adult movie actress, and she says, "I've decided to debase myself and get into politics." Right? And so we use the term now in a derogatory way, when it was always meant to be a situation where somebody would get into a position to truly represent the population that they're elected by, and that's what we call them, representatives, and to represent the values and the experience and the environment of the people from which they come, dutifully, and then to work with others to come up with a solution to the nation's issues that is good for the most amount of people. And, you know, it's not good news unless it's good news for everyone. Would be great if we all lived that way. But, you know, we're trying to come up with something that's good for the most amount of people possible, and by our, you know, American constitutional values. How do we get the right people to run for office, and then how do we go through the process of electing them, is something I think is harder and harder to do. I have also considered running for office at one point in my life, and I was this close, and I had been experienced in an appointed position, and was being asked now, having that experience, to go for an elected position. And I couldn't do it. It's not that I can't be, it's not that I can't be passionate about views and articulate them.
Sure.
I can do that. But it's all the other stuff. I have to support other people in a given party that I may or may not agree with. It's the kind of deals that you have to make behind closed doors to give you this, and some people call that compromise. I think there's very little win-win anymore.
Right.
In that process, and that's the issue.
All right, I have an idea.
Okay.
Literally just came to me. What if we run it like jury duty? So everybody has, an equal possibility of getting called for jury duty.
Okay.
So there are...
If you voted, by the way.
Okay, well, so there's already some caveats there.
Right.
But so, you get your letter in the mail, you got to call this number. So you start going through the process of getting a panel of folks that are representative of our population. And then maybe you do end up with 12 candidates at the end. You can, select like, no, I don't want to run for office. Okay, great, you've disqualified yourself. But then you get your 12 people that are representative of the populace. And, you have maybe 3 debates. They can all answer the questions. There's no money spent. You pick the best one, and then we're good to go.
I think that the parties would have a real problem with that.
You think?
Yeah, and I think that they are probably the most powerful things. It's funny you talk about politicians. I heard something the other day that I really liked. As a thought provoker, or as something to contemplate, not at how true it is, although one could argue it is. And that is that take any 2 political people, Trump and Biden. They have more in common with each other than they do with any of us.
Yeah.
And have we created a monster, a political group, a class of folks who are so unlike, and I'll even say out of touch with the real issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis as citizens of the country, that we've got to do some kind of a reset, or we have to do some kind of a way to get more of the citizens that are actually, doing business and living in the country to be truly representative. Because how, if that statement is true, that those folks have more in common with each other than they do with us, and yet there are different political parties, and you think that they're as different as night and day, until you look closer at their financial and other situation, then you think, okay, well, wait a minute. How did those folks get there, whereas the citizens are not?
Yeah.
Our founding fathers started talking about a citizen legislature. There are some states, we live in one, where our legislators are not paid.
Right.
They're not professional politicians, they are amateur politicians. They get stipends and some money for being there during the session, but they are not paid. And the thinking there is that you'll get the citizens from the population in the legislature, at least at the state level.
Assuming they can afford to not go to their day job and serve in that office.
And so that's the argument.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, wait a minute. If we paid them, then we could get people who are normal citizens to run and be elected, and who can't, who they still have to take the time off to be legislators,
Sure.
but at least they don't have to be people who can afford to do that, right? But having lived in California, I can say that the other side of that coin is professional politicians aren't necessarily your best people either.
Right.
And so, anyway, you're right, we're not going to solve this in our 25 minutes today. But I will tell you that we could probably ask some good questions and start some discussions that might get us to a better answer than what we've got today.
All right, so we're going to leave it with you. The question is there a better way? I am open for any wild and crazy idea that you have. Leave it in the comments, shoot us an email, however you want to get in touch. You can find us at our website, curiositynotjudgment.com. We've got a Facebook page, and of course, you can leave a comment where you hear or see this episode. So let us know your thoughts. Crazier the better in my mind. Let's see if we can figure out a better way to do politics. Until next time, have a great one.
Take care and vote.